I work night shifts at Walmart. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and honestly, the weird stuff usually doesn't start until after midnight. You'd think the worst part would be the random drunks or rowdy teens, but let me tell you, it's the silence. That bone-deep, oppressive quiet when the store feels like a giant, empty tomb. The kind that makes you think you're the only person left in the world. Last Friday, around 2:30 a.m., I was working in the electronics section. The store was practically deserted except for some guy browsing DVDs near the back wall and an elderly woman slowly pushing her cart through the grocery aisles. I was rearranging a display of clearance headphones when I heard it. The softest whisper of movement, almost like someone brushing past a rack of clothing. I glanced up, expecting to see the DVD guy moving on to another aisle, but he was still there, frozen in front of the shelves. Except now, his head was cocked slightly to one side, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Can I help you find something?" I called out, forcing my voice to stay steady. He didn't respond, didn't move. I don't even think he blinked. The longer I stared, the more my stomach twisted into knots. Something about him wasn't right. Then he turned. Slowly, mechanically. His face was completely blank, like a doll's, and his eyes, God, his eyes were empty. Not just lifeless but void, like someone had scooped out his soul and left two black holes in its place. That's when the lights flickered. It wasn't unusual for the lights to act up, but this time, the flickering didn't stop. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed and stuttered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to crawl along the aisles like living things. The DVD guy, if you could even call him that anymore, started walking toward me, his movements jerky, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, taking a step back. My voice cracked. I hated that it cracked. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his arm, pointing past me toward the toy section. His finger trembled, like it took every ounce of strength he had to hold it steady. I turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just rows of cheap action figures and stuffed animals. When I looked back, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. I should have called my manager or even security, but something stopped me. Some primal instinct whispered that I shouldn't draw attention to myself, that whatever was happening, it was better to pretend I hadn't noticed. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, coming from somewhere deep in the store. I froze. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I thought it might burst. Slowly, I turned toward the noise, half expecting to see some stray dog or raccoon that had wandered inside. But it wasn't an animal. It was her. Standing at the end of the aisle, partially obscured by the shadows, was the elderly woman I'd seen earlier. Only now, she wasn't pushing her cart. She was crouched low to the ground, her spine arched at an unnatural angle, her head tilted back so far it looked like her neck might snap, and she was staring at me, smiling. Her teeth weren't human anymore. They were jagged, razor-sharp things, glinting faintly in the stuttering light. Her eyes, once tired and watery, were now wide and unblinking, filled with a manic, predatory hunger. Before I could move, she lunged forward on all fours, faster than anything her age should have been capable of. I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back, just sprinted down the aisles, dodging shelves and displays as that horrifying growl grew louder behind me. "Help! Someone help me!" I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty store. But no one answered. It was like I was trapped in some twisted funhouse, the aisles stretching endlessly in every direction, the fluorescent lights flickering faster and faster until they felt like strobe lights. I couldn't tell where I was anymore. The electronics section, the home goods, the garden center. It all blurred together in a disorienting maze of shelves and shadows. And then I saw it. The mirror. It was one of those cheap full-length mirrors they sell in the home decor section. I stumbled to a stop, gasping for breath, and stared at my reflection. Except it wasn't my reflection. It was me, but not me. The thing in the mirror smiled, its teeth sharp and wrong, its eyes gleaming with malice. It raised a hand and waved at me, and then it stepped forward. Out of the mirror. It stepped out of the mirror like it was walking through water, its movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. My knees locked, my brain screaming at me to run, but my body refused to cooperate. Couldn't even breathe. All I could do was stare at this thing that looked exactly like me, only twisted. Its eyes were the worst part. They were mine, but brighter, unnatural, like the flicker of a dying fluorescent bulb. And that smile, God, that smile stretched impossibly wide, showing rows of teeth that looked like jagged shards of broken glass. "Hello," it said, its voice a distorted version of mine, too deep, too hollow. I stumbled back, bumping into the shelf behind me. A box of plastic bins tumbled to the floor, the sound loud enough to jolt me back into action. "Nope, nope, nope," I muttered, spinning around and bolting down the aisle. The air felt heavy, like trying to run underwater. I glanced over my shoulder, and there it was, walking toward me. Not running, just walking, but somehow keeping pace no matter how fast I moved. "Why are you running?" it called after me, its voice echoing eerily. "You can't escape yourself." I turned a corner, nearly crashing into a display of scented candles, and ducked into the nearest aisle. I crouched low, trying to catch my breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out. The store was silent now. No growling, no flickering lights, no sound of footsteps. Just the oppressive, suffocating silence. I peeked around the corner, expecting to see the doppelganger standing there, but the aisle was empty. Maybe I'd lost it. "Found you," a voice whispered directly in my ear. I whipped around, but there was no one there. Just rows of cleaning supplies and an unsettlingly long stretch of shadow where the lights had gone out. This couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming or hallucinating, or... A sharp laugh cut through my thoughts, high-pitched and unnatural, coming from the shadows at the end of the aisle. "Do you want to see where I come from?" the voice taunted, echoing in the dark. "Stay the hell away from me," I shouted, grabbing the closest thing I could find, a broom, and holding it in front of me like a weapon. The laugh grew louder, almost maniacal, as the shadow began to stretch and writhe, reaching out toward me like it was alive. I bolted again, gripping the broom like a lifeline. The aisles felt like they were closing in, the shelves towering higher and higher, the lights dimming until the entire store was bathed in an eerie, flickering gloom. I ran past the registers, heading for the front doors. But when I reached them, they wouldn't open. The automatic sensors didn't respond, the glass refusing to budge no matter how hard I shoved. "Let me out," I screamed, pounding on the doors. Behind me, I heard the sound of something scraping against the floor, like nails dragging across tile. Slowly, I turned around. It was there, standing in the middle of the store, illuminated by a single flickering light. My doppelganger. But it wasn't alone. The old woman from earlier crawled out of the shadows behind it, her movements jerky and unnatural. And then the DVD guy appeared, his head still cocked at that impossible angle, his empty eyes locked on me. They weren't human anymore. They were things, shadows wearing human skin, their bodies twitching and contorting in ways that made my stomach churn. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The doppelganger smiled wider, its teeth glinting in the dim light. "We want to show you the truth." Before I could react, the shadows surged forward, swallowing me whole. It was like being plunged into icy water, my body weightless and frozen, my screams muffled by the suffocating darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I was standing in the electronics section again, the store bright and normal. The shelves were neatly stocked, the fluorescent lights humming quietly. For a moment, I thought it was over, that maybe I'd imagined everything. But then I saw the mirror. My reflection wasn't moving. It just stood there, staring back at me, its empty eyes filled with malice. I froze, staring at the reflection in the mirror that wasn't me. Tilted its head, slowly, methodically, like it was studying me. Its lips curled into that grotesque, glass shard smile again. "Why are you so afraid?" it asked, its voice reverberating like a dozen of me speaking at once. My throat was dry, my mind racing for answers. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. You're not real, I whispered, trying to convince myself more than the thing in the mirror. The reflection laughed, a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Then it reached forward, pressing its hand against the glass. And I felt it. A cold, clammy hand touched mine. Not on the surface of the mirror, but on my skin, as if it had reached through. I yanked my hand back and stumbled away, tripping over a stray box on the floor. The broom I'd been clutching clattered out of my grip and skidded across the tiles. The reflection didn't follow. Instead, it leaned closer to the glass, its movements distorted and wrong, like it was glitching. "Do you know where you are?" it asked, its tone mocking. I shook my head, scrambling to my feet. "I'm in Walmart," I muttered, my voice shaky. "No," it said, its smile widening. "You're in between." "In between what?" I demanded, my voice louder now, tinged with desperation. It didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand and tapped the glass, the sound echoing far louder than it should have. Each tap sent ripples through the mirror, distorting the reflection until it was a swirling mass of darkness. And then the darkness spilled out. It poured from the mirror like thick black smoke, pooling on the floor and rising up in twisting tendrils. The shadows crawled toward me, faster than I could react. I turned to run, but the tendrils wrapped around my ankles, yanking me down. I hit the floor hard, my breath knocked out of me, and before I could scream, the shadows began to drag me back toward the mirror. I clawed at the tiles, my nails scraping uselessly against the smooth surface. The mirror loomed closer, its surface rippling like liquid, and I could see my reflection again. Only this time it wasn't smiling. It looked terrified. "Let me go," I shouted, thrashing against the shadows. The thing in the mirror leaned forward, its face mere inches from the glass. "You don't belong here," it said, its voice a low growl. And then it pulled me in. I was falling, not through air, but through something thicker, heavier. It felt like being submerged in oil, my limbs sluggish and unresponsive. Shapes and shadows swirled around me, whispers echoing in the void. "Help me," a voice whispered, faint and distant. "Run," another voice hissed. Faces appeared in the darkness, familiar faces. The old woman, the DVD guy, even my doppelganger. Their mouths moved, but their words were lost in the cacophony of whispers. And then I hit the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I lay there for a moment, gasping for air. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in Walmart. I was in a space that defied logic. The ground was made of glass, reflecting an endless sky filled with swirling storm clouds. The air was thick and cold, and everywhere I looked, shadows writhed and twisted, their forms constantly changing. In the distance, I saw a figure standing on the horizon. It was too far away to make out any details, but I knew it was watching me. I pushed myself to my feet, every instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The horizon stretched endlessly in every direction, the shadows closing in like a living wall. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the void. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised an arm and pointed behind me. I turned, and my heart nearly stopped. There was another mirror identical to the one in the store, but this time my reflection wasn't in it. Instead, I saw the Walmart store, bright and empty, as if I'd never left. "Go back," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant, cutting through the chaos like a knife. I hesitated, glancing back at the figure. It was closer now, close enough that I could see its face, or rather, the lack of one. Its head was featureless, a smooth surface where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. "Go back," it repeated, more forcefully this time. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran toward the mirror, the shadows surging around me, trying to pull me back. I dove through the glass. I landed in the electronics section, gasping for breath. The store was silent and normal again, the lights steady and bright, but something was wrong. I stood up, looking around. The shelves were stocked differently, the layout slightly off. And then I saw the clock on the wall. It was 11:30 p.m., but I'd started my shift at midnight. I wasn't back in my world. Not yet. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second hammering home the realization that I wasn't where, or when, I was supposed to be. The store felt almost normal, but not quite. The air was heavy, like it was charged with static, and the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than they should have. I took a tentative step forward, my shoes squeaking against the tile. The sound echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the walls like I was in a cavern instead of a Walmart. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. I walked down the main aisle, past shelves of canned goods and neatly arranged end caps, searching for any sign of life. But the store was eerily empty. No employees, no customers, just me, or so I thought. I turned a corner into the frozen food section and froze. There was someone or something standing at the far end of the aisle. It was tall and thin, its silhouette distorted by the foggy glass of the freezer doors. It wasn't moving, but I could feel its gaze on me, even from this distance. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing. "Do you work here?" The figure tilted its head, the motion sharp and unnatural, like a marionette's strings being yanked. Then, slowly, it raised an arm and pointed toward the end of the aisle. I hesitated, my heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but something compelled me to move closer. As I approached, the figure stepped back into the shadows, disappearing behind the corner. I quickened my pace, rounding the end of the aisle, and stopped dead. It wasn't there. Instead, I found myself in front of the mirror section. Full-length mirrors lined the walls, their surfaces pristine and polished. But something was off. My reflection wasn't right. In every mirror, my reflection stood perfectly still, staring back at me. Even when I moved, it didn't. I waved a hand. My reflection didn't move. Instead, it smiled. "Don't you see?" It whispered, its voice soft and raspy, like wind through dead leaves. "See what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The reflection's smile widened, its teeth sharp and too many. It raised a hand and pointed behind me. I spun around and nearly screamed. The tall, thin figure from earlier was standing just a few feet away. Its face was featureless, smooth and pale like polished marble. Its body was wrong, too thin and elongated, its limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. It took a step toward me, and the sound of its footfall was wet, like meat slapping against tile. I stumbled back, crashing into one of the mirrors. The glass was cold against my skin, almost painfully so. "You don't belong here," the reflection said, its voice growing louder, more insistent. The figure lunged. I ducked at the last second, the thing's claws scraping against the mirror where my head had been. The glass shattered, shards raining down around me. I didn't stop to think. I ran. I tore through the aisles, the world around me warping and twisting. The shelves seemed to stretch higher and higher, the aisles growing narrower and darker. The buzzing of the lights turned into a deafening hum, drowning out everything else. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away. I rounded a corner and skidded to a stop. The mirrors were back, dozens of them, lining the walls and floor, surrounding me in a labyrinth of reflections. I could see myself in every direction, but none of the reflections matched my movements. Some stood still, others waved at me, and some just stared, their expressions twisted with malice. "Where are you going?" One of them taunted, its voice dripping with mockery. Another laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally. "You can't leave. You're one of us now." "No, I'm not," I shouted, my voice cracking. I turned to run, but the mirrors were everywhere. No matter which way I went, I found myself staring back at endless versions of me, each one more wrong than the last. And then I saw it, a single mirror different from the others. Its surface wasn't reflective. It was dark, swirling with shadow and light, like the void I'd fallen into earlier. Instinctively, I knew it was a way out. I sprinted toward it, ignoring the laughter and whispers of my reflections. The shadows in the mirror seemed to reach out for me, welcoming me like an old friend. Just as I reached the mirror, something grabbed my ankle. I hit the ground hard, the air rushing out of my lungs. I looked back to see one of the reflections, my reflection, crawling out of its mirror. Its face was twisted into a grotesque grin, its eyes glowing with malevolent glee. "You can't leave," it hissed, its grip tightening. "This is your home now." "No!" I screamed, kicking at it with all my strength. Its grip loosened just enough for me to scramble to my feet. I dove headfirst into the dark mirror, the shadows swallowing me whole. I landed hard on cold, tiled floor. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then I opened my eyes. I was back in Walmart, the real Walmart. The lights were steady and bright, the shelves normal, the air calm. I could hear the distant hum of the HVAC system and the faint beep of a scanner at one of the registers. I staggered to my feet, my body trembling. "Hey, you okay?" I turned to see a coworker staring at me, concern etched across his face. I don't know," I muttered, but as I walked toward the exit, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in one of the freezer doors. It was smiling, and this time I wasn't. I didn't sleep that day. How could I? After leaving Walmart, I went straight home, locked every door and window, and sat in the corner of my living room, clutching a kitchen knife like it would somehow protect me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every shadow in the house seemed to shift and stretch, every creak of the floorboards making my heart race. And the mirrors, I covered every single one with sheets, towels, anything I could find. I couldn't bear to look at my reflection, not after what I'd seen. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself it was over, that I was safe, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, I heard it, a faint tapping sound. It was coming from the bathroom. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. The knife in my hand felt useless, like a toy. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, echoing through the silence of the house. "Get a grip," I muttered under my breath, forcing myself to stand. I crept toward the bathroom, every step feeling like a lifetime. The door was closed, but I could see the faint flicker of light from underneath it. I hadn't left the light on. My fingers trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I hesitated, my mind racing with a million what-ifs. What if it was nothing? What if it was everything? Before I could change my mind, I threw the door open. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror wasn't. My reflection was there, staring back at me. But it wasn't me. Not really. It was smiling. That same unnaturally wide, toothy grin. Its eyes glinted with malice, and its hand was pressed against the glass, as if it were trying to push through. "Miss me?" it whispered, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. I stumbled back, my back hitting the wall. The knife slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. "You're not real," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The reflection tilted its head, its smile never faltering. "Aren't I?" I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The reflection leaned closer, its hand sliding across the glass like it was testing for weak spots. "You brought me back," it said, its tone mocking. "When you stepped through the mirror, when you looked too long, you opened the door." "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "That's not true. I got out. I escaped." The reflection laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You didn't escape. You just brought the nightmare with you." The lights flickered, the room growing colder. My reflection's smile widened, its teeth impossibly sharp. "Let me out," it whispered. I bolted out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. My heart felt like it was going to explode, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. But it didn't stop there. The tapping started again, louder this time, coming from every mirror in the house. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed a hammer from the kitchen and started smashing every mirror I could find. The bathroom, the bedroom, even the little hand mirror on my nightstand. Each one shattered into 1,000 pieces. But the tapping didn't stop. I could hear it in the shards, in the tiny, fractured pieces of glass scattered across the floor. And then I realized it wasn't coming from the mirrors anymore. It was coming from inside the walls. I didn't sleep that night or the night after. I didn't go back to work either. The store called a few times, but I ignored it. All I could think about was the tapping, the reflection, the thing I'd let into my world. It was always there, in the corner of my eye, in the darkened windows at night. I started seeing faces in the shadows, hearing whispers in the dead of night. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. One night, after hours of pacing and jumping at every little sound, I decided I needed answers. I grabbed my phone and started searching for anything that might explain what was happening. Paranormal forums, urban legends, even conspiracy theories. I read everything I could find. And then I found it. A story about a man who worked the night shift at a department store. He'd seen something in the mirrors, something that shouldn't have been there. The story ended with him disappearing. His apartment found empty except for a single, unbroken mirror. The date on the story was 2 years old. The man's name? It was written at the bottom of the page, next to a blurry photo of him smiling with coworkers. It was the DVD guy from Walmart. I stared at the photo, my blood running cold. He looked normal, happy even. But now I knew what had happened to him. And I knew what was going to happen to me. As I sit here writing this, I can hear the tapping again. It's louder now, more insistent. The lights are flickering, and the shadows in the corners of the room are starting to move. I don't think I have much time left. If you're reading this and you ever see something strange in a mirror, something that doesn't move like it should, something that smiles when you don't look too long. Because once it sees you, it never stops watching. It never stops waiting. And sooner or later, it will find a way out. I thought the nightmare would end. After smashing every mirror, after sealing myself inside my home, I thought I'd bought myself time, maybe even a second chance. But the truth? There's no escaping it. The tapping stopped for a few days. I started to believe I might have done enough. I convinced myself that if I stayed out of Walmart, stayed away from anything reflective, I'd be okay. But it's not that simple. It was late last night when it returned. I was lying on the couch, the TV flickering with static. I hadn't even turned it on. The sound was sharp and grating, like something trying to crawl out of the speakers. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with a notification. Unknown number. Look behind you. I froze, my blood running ice cold. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You can't run. My hands trembled as I grabbed the phone and dropped it immediately when I saw my reflection in the screen. It wasn't me. The reflection's smile stretched wider, its teeth gleaming in the light of the screen. Its eyes burned with a hunger I couldn't comprehend. Let me out, it whispered, its voice warping through the speakers of the TV, through the hum of my fridge, through the faint creak of the floorboards. It was everywhere. And then the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness, so absolute I couldn't see my own hands. I scrambled for the flashlight I kept on the table, but before I could grab it, something cold brushed against my arm. I screamed, jumping to my feet, but I didn't know where to run. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. The shadows moved on their own, twisting and writhing like they were alive. You can't hide, the voice said, echoing all around me. I stumbled into the hallway, blindly feeling my way toward the front door. My hand found the doorknob, but when I turned it, the door wouldn't budge. You let me in, the voice whispered, now impossibly close. I spun around, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, and turned it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on the thing standing at the end of the hall. It wasn't just my reflection anymore. It was dozens of them. All of them me, but twisted and wrong. Smiling too wide, their limbs bent at unnatural angles, their eyes glowing with the same malevolent hunger. They moved in unison, stepping closer, their bare feet silent against the floor. I backed away, the flashlight trembling in my hands. Stay back, I shouted, but my voice broke, trembling as much as my hands. One of them stepped forward, its smile wider than ever. You can't stop us. We're already here. The light flickered. The air grew colder. And then they lunged. I don't remember how I got out. When I woke up, I was lying in the parking lot of Walmart. It was morning, the store buzzing with customers and employees like nothing had ever happened. My clothes were torn, my hands bloodied from what I can only assume was me clawing my way out of whatever that place was. But it doesn't matter, because when I looked up at the store, I saw it. In the reflection of the sliding glass doors, they were there, watching, smiling. Everywhere I go now, I see them, in windows, in puddles, in the glint of a phone screen. They're always there, just out of reach, waiting for me to make a mistake. I know what they want. They want to replace me, and I don't think I can stop them. So if you see me, or someone who looks like me, don't trust it. Don't believe anything it says, because it won't be me. And sooner or later, it'll come for you too.